Welcome to ABA on Tap, where our goal is to find the best recipe to brew the smoothest, coldest, and best tasting ABA around. I'm Dan Lowry with Mike Rubio, and join us on our journey as we look back into the ingredients to form the best concoction of ABA on tap. In this podcast, we will talk about the history of the ABA brew, how much to consume to achieve the optimum buzz while not getting too drunk, and the recommended pairings to bring to the table. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and always analyze responsibly.
All right. Welcome back to another installment of ABA on Tap. I am your ever grateful co-host, Mike Rubio, and this is part 2 of our intriguing interview with Dr. Megan DeLeon Miller. Enjoy.
Yeah. And I really don't know 100% that the more data, the better is true when we look at the research, especially for autism. It could be something else, but for the type of service that needs to exist with that shared experience and really authentically, genuinely being responsive to your clients, it's impossible to have a ton of data to do that well. But the data the data we take needs to matter, and we need to make decisions based off of that data and still have a process in place for that. But even if I'm not saying to do this, but my guess would be, even if we only took data once a week, maybe you even video record and you look back, right? Yeah. You're going to see if from a fidelity standpoint, the people are setting things up the way they should be, then you're likely to see much more progress than if you're, being super rigid and regimented about taking, I know companies will promote if you get 100 trials in per session, you win a prize or something. It's I'd rather have 5 quality data points in the session and be able to observe that you had some really good connected experiences with your client than see 100 data points. Because if you got 100 data points, I guarantee you your interactions were not quality.
Dan literally took data sets and took extensive data sets and then would pick every other data point or every third data point and then demonstrate in training to our staff the difference in those curves, which was minimal. But we just had these diehard BCBAs who were like, nope. No, and you did such a good job of literally parsing it down. Now I'm going to take every third data point, now every fourth. Did this curve really tell us anything different than having every single one? And they were convinced it did. And it's look at it. No, no, look at the trend line. It's almost exact. But it's so hard to get away from that notion that we can be so precise. And I like what you said. Statistically, it might be better to have all the data points. But again, if it's compromised your interaction at all, then you've got something different there. But the idea that somebody videotaped you or somebody sitting there and taking the data, or like we tell our staff, if you see a kiddo twice a week, teach one of the days, and then maybe the other day you take the data. And better yet, the day that I'm there with you, I'll take the data. You just interact. And that, I think that makes a lot of sense. We definitely appreciate you saying that here on ABA on Tap.
You asked that question too, the blasphemous question. What if we only took data once a week? I remember you asking that question.
I'm blaming it on you.
That was getting into pseudoscience.
I don't need any more trouble. Okay.
It is interesting though, like you said, and like Megan said, that if you look at schools, right? Schools teach, then test. And ABA was always teach and test at the same time. And how many times do we need to test? How many times do we need to stick this thermometer into this turkey to realize it's not cooked yet? Can we give a little bit of time to let the turkey cook rather than, okay, not cooked, still not cooked, still not cooked, still not cooked, at some point. And then like Megan said too, with the data, I would say that a lot of times there is too much data, because what happens is you get satiated to the data. There's too much. People don't know. It doesn't have the great value anymore. And people don't even know what to do with it anymore because you're losing the value. So yeah,
you get another 3-inch binder.
Another 3-inch. Then you go to Central Reach.
Put it on some shelf. Yeah.
Can I close out one thought on the health insurance piece? So again, I think the biggest thing, what's interesting is when people give me pushback about especially the social communication, when you look at, for autism specifically, the DSM-5 diagnosis, it's way easier to tie in social communication goals and a social communication focus to the diagnosis and medical necessity than any of the things in any of our other assessments. It just blows my mind. I'm like, why not? Why, if you truly are making it based off of the diagnosis, like we're supposed to be, And aligning it with the DSM-5, every single one of your goals should be tied to social communication. And maybe with the exception of a few, depending, but generally speaking, they should all somehow, that's how you get a diagnosis. Like,
so you're saying autism is a socio-communicative disorder, Dr. Megan?
Yeah, isn't that wild?
No, we literally had to do that with a peer-to-peer reviewer. Yeah. And it was interesting because like social communication, and the goal was kind of like in between, but it had like language in it. And she was like, why is that not communication? We're like, oh, we could take this, so we could move it from social to communication. It doesn't matter.
But which domain do you want me to put it in? I'll rewrite it because it's. And again, I think that's maybe we can talk about this a little bit. You're sort of alluding to it without speaking to it directly, but we're almost too good at our task analysis. I think in ABA, we almost break things apart too far, and then putting them back together gets a little difficult. And then we get caught up in, well, that should be in this domain, and that's addressing this. To your point, Dr. Megan, it's all connected somehow. We just have to learn how that is. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, it's funny. I think what's interesting is we break certain things down so far, and then there's other things that we've just completely ignored that are actually important. So like, again, when we were talking about with manding, like people want to just jump in and start with manding, but they've done nothing with pre-communicative, social communication type skills. And it's like, well, we haven't broken that down far enough.
Yeah, sure.
And actually, if you did, all of the little steps we have for manding, you probably wouldn't even need, because you'd have the foundation built, and everything else, generally speaking, for most kids would come online because we put the foundation in the first place that was missing.
You made me think about something just now that I've been contemplating. I'd love your take on it. What about hand leading? Hand leading is, I feel, historically such a controversial little thing because it seems to be that a lot of the kiddos we treat do that. So people almost misperceive it as a problem. But, you know, that's socially communicative.
So we call that's part of the ADOS, and it's using the person as a tool.
Okay.
So I think what you're saying
that's
is
where
like
it becomes diagnostic.
Hand around to like get something, yeah.
Or even just going to grab a parent with no vocal,
and like
but
bringing them
over,
right?
Stuff. Which again, I think is a little diagnostically relevant, and then developmentally also very relevant. Yeah, I'll let you explain.
Yeah. Well, I think for that, it ties back in with what we were talking about earlier with looking at, the manding and tacting and social communication and really needing to connect with how this person shows up. So if it's hand leading, or I know a lot of children who use their body to communicate. Sometimes they don't do it in a safe way, but you watch their body and it's like they're not using gestures or signs. They're physically moving their body toward things or away from things. They might be eloping. They might, I call it bullying, not to mean like as a negative term, but it just looks like they're bullying their way through stuff. Like they're just like doing this kind of thing to like get to what they want. And they're communicating so much. But instead of noticing that and affirming and honoring that, even if it's unsafe at first, we can still acknowledge it and shape it into something safer. But we tend to ignore it completely. We don't give it any sort of recognition. And we're like, no, you have to communicate like this. Could you imagine being in a foreign country, not knowing the language and using hand leading or using your body and having people just be like, I don't know, I'm not helping you, right? Like that would be so frustrating. But we do that to our clients all the time, where it's like, well, the way you're communicating isn't good enough. And we put the responsibility on them, instead of acknowledging and connecting with what they're doing that comes up for them naturally, and then using that to shape, not because the way they're communicating is wrong, but because if we can shape it into something that more people understand, then they can get their needs met and like navigate the world in a safer way. But ultimately, I hope at some point, these other forms of communication, like hand leading or using their body or whatever, people will be more affirming of. So it's like, oh, we don't even have to teach other people because everyone understands that some people just communicate this way and that's okay.
I mean, it's maybe a little more unsafe, but you could make the same argument for a young child with biting, for example. Is that fair to say? Would you say that fits a category of some level of social communication?
With biting, sometimes it's like both. There's like a sensory piece that comes up. Like a kid gets so excited or so mad, and there's just this like physical urge to like bite something for whatever reason. I don't know
squeeze their fists, or the stiffening when kids have tantrums, they stiffen their body. I think it's all very similar. Yeah.
There's like that physical piece to it. So again, it's same idea. We can acknowledge, oh, this is what you're trying to communicate right now. And like, this is the meaning that I can observe from what you're doing. And then it makes it easier to explicitly teach, okay, next time you're feeling too excited, here's a safer thing that we can try to do. Or here's like a pillow you can bite on or something. Like if that, motivation is so high to engage in the thing that might not be that safe, we can make it safer.
So the idea is we accommodate, we allow for the behavior, but we posit it such that it doesn't have a negative impact on the environment.
Right.
That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. And then my big piece with that, is that a lot of people try to just wait until the moments happen. But the more we can practice in like neutral times and build up fluency with the replacements, because a lot of people think you can just write a replacement on paper and it'll just magically happen.
Yeah.
Like, our replacement for biting is that they'll clap their hands, which doesn't even make sense because they're not even related to
That's why you put it in the goal, though, right? Once you write it in the goal, it happens. Like the child is not speaking, the child will speak 50 words. Voila, right?
Done.
You don't have to once you write it in the goal. Dr. Megan, you're causing a lot of controversy on our show. We appreciate it, though. One more question, I think, and trying to differentiate these things that we've discussed, but you're lending much more nuance. You've talked about shifting gaze, which I love. And a long time ago, we were very focused on eye contact. Mm-hmm. What's the difference? How do they work together? Give us your insight on that.
So this is another one that comes down to like function and topography.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
Gaze shifting is like we shift our gaze for multiple reasons. If something without a person could happen in the environment and we're going to shift our gaze, like what was that sound or what's that new thing that just came in, and we're orienting our eyes in whatever direction we need to. We can do the same thing with people. We're going to gaze shift maybe to check in. Or you'll see it even with like little ones, if they're in a situation where they're starting to feel unsafe and they start like looking around for their parents and like checking, is my mom still seem calm? Okay, I'm still calm. And they, there's that social component to it. So that's the functional piece of gaze shifting, right? Like that's what we need to be seeing. It doesn't need to be, I'm like directly staring into your eyes, right? But it's more of that orienting my attention to whether it's people or objects or whatever, versus eye contact. Again, there's like this idea, because well-meaning people, well before we understood all of this, noticed that people who tend to make eye contact, like different things are happening for them. So that was, a goal. Obviously, that was initially a huge focus. But again, that was topographical. Look at me. Like that's topographical. There's no meaning behind it. Why am I looking at you? Right? Like if I'm just looking at you because you told me to, that doesn't mean anything. Like that doesn't mean anything for skill development. And of course, we have autistic self-advocates who've said looking someone directly in the eye, it can be very disorienting and dysregulating for them. So like, why would we have that as a thing that we're doing? And then especially from like we're having a conversation, let's look at each other's standpoint. They get so distracted. Okay, I gotta make sure, has it been 5 seconds? I gotta, and they're doing it again topographically instead of really looking at how do we do this from a way that's meaningful, that like the gaze is going to shift as just a functional part of the interaction.
So what if I'm holding an M&M? I'm kidding. Go ahead. Here, we got it. Go. I know you got questions, Dan. I'm going to let you loose again.
Yeah, sounds good. So you said initially kind of your first ABA-ish, I don't even know if it was an ABA experience, but you were partnered or collaborating with an art therapist and a play therapist way back in the day.
Yeah.
So that being your first kind of experience into the field, do you think that shaped your perspective rather than just being a traditional, I'm going to jump in through the ABA as a lot of people do now without having any of the diversification?
Yeah, it definitely helped a ton. I mean, I don't know, it seems like you guys had kind of a similar model when you started. So I was part of the early days where you had like a family would hire 3 to 5 people to come in and do their ABA sessions for 40 hours a week. And then there was a consultant that would come like once a month. If we got observed, we were lucky. So that one team out of the 4 teams I had the play therapist and the art therapist. Then I was on other teams, and like one of the teams had like a super rigid person that was like, this is how we have to do it, blah, blah, blah. And so I got to see the contrast of, the progress or not being made. versus the different perspectives. And that really impacted me a lot. Like the little boy where we had the play therapist and the art therapist, he cried so much during the first weekend, like the first workshop, that he threw up.
Oh,
like,
wow.
I was shocked that the parents even wanted to continue with therapy. And I, wonder to this day where this little boy would have gone if he had had all rigid people up in there, like his life experience would be so drastically different. But thankfully, especially it was the art therapist was definitely much more like compassion and like, oh, let's not put him through this. And then when the play therapist came in, she was like, why do we have a table and chairs in here? He's clearly upset about that. Like, why don't we just sit on the floor and play with him and like use shaping and all the things?
Wait a minute, sit on the floor. Does that? Are you sure that works?
Well, that's why I said it wasn't ABA, because it didn't have the table and chairs. Yeah,
and it clearly wasn't an IKEA table and chair. That might have been the other problem that Dan tends to identify.
So maybe gave you a little. Go ahead, please.
Oh, with that little boy, we used social stories, and the amount of progress, he was only 2, but he was really into books and had a lot of things that, looking back and knowing what I know now about neuroscience and emotional regulation, there was just a lot of stuff causing him this, activating his nervous system. And reading the books to him gave him that like expectation, that predictability, and the practice with what to do instead. And we combined it with shaping, but we did it very behavioral skills training. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time, but we would read the book, practice, and like slowly put him into whatever situation was causing difficulty for him. And it like broke my heart when I went to grad school and had professors or researchers being like, social stories are not okay. Like they're not research based. And I'm like, well, why don't you go tell that to this little guy who has like 100 social stories, and his life would be completely different if we hadn't done that with him, because he's just from his one example alone, like it's effective.
For sure. And then, a lot of times in ABA, we get kind of stuck in our habits, right? So we think about the social stories of like where they're going to be laminated and, my name is Johnny. I don't like going to the dentist when I go to the dentist, like those kind of things. But now even watching a video or looking at a lot of things on YouTube can be the next iteration of a social story, explaining what a situation is going to be like in a much more meaningful way to these individuals, to any individuals. I watch social stories all the time.
Yeah, I wonder how that works. Carol Gray is one of those people in the field that I feel, very effective with what she's done with social stories. And then yet I feel like almost like PECs, a lot of us just haven't implemented those things the way they were intended to be implemented. So they miss.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. And I also wonder with social stories, I don't know if based on the traits of autism, if we sort of discount the idea of or the potential of observational learning from a social learning perspective, and that's why we sort of poo-poo them. But no, I agree. It's one of my favorite things I'm sharing a story, and the idea that we've created these formats for social stories, I'm very appreciative of. And then I've also been guilty of saying, well, most children's books are social stories in some way. So if you can engage with a book, now you're working on communication and joint attention and social information and all these things that, back to your point, we task analyze, we piece things apart so much because it's important from a developmental perspective. Now we're talking about making sure that we don't take them apart so far that they're decontextualized. And I think that's a really important piece. As far as the working with a play therapist, that must have informed you so much beyond this idea of SD, response consequence, right? So the idea that somebody's engaging a child, somebody's playing. Will you talk about that a little bit more and what you had seen in terms of a contingency, and then now what a play therapist was turning that into with regard to interaction?
So the play therapist in it was more like showing us how to just be more naturalistic for, just again, sitting on the floor. He had a playroom downstairs, so just kind of following his lead. It's a lot of what we would see with the naturalistic interventions, like pivotal response or early start Denver model. So there wasn't a whole lot, like, to me, that's different from those approaches. And, that was more, I think her training as a play therapist was more in like I think it was either floor time or something similar to that. So it was just, again, it was a lot more about connecting with the child and just closely observing them and being able to follow their lead and, make critical decisions. Like, is now the best time to try to present a few instructions or, all that kind of stuff. So Now, unfortunately, with floor time, there's still not research. And it's really unfortunate because a lot of the things with the developmentally based therapies that came out kind of as like a pushback against the more traditional low VOS approaches, they were on the right track with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But they never did the research, and they kind of stopped at the level of just imitate the child. Like that's going to do everything.
Right.
They never really took it further than that. So I'm grateful again to have her model and like see that. And she was also like she was either in or was planning to go to grad school in ABA, and she ended up becoming a BCBA as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice, like model of, I don't want to say this in like a mean way, but sometimes if somebody came in with just the training on like the floor time or like play therapy, it might have been too loose or like too far away from what we would be doing as a science. It wasn't like that. She was, kind of synthesizing both things. So
I'm currently on a quest to find the balance between, so traditionally we've talked about structured versus unstructured, and more play-based or child-directed approaches falling under this unstructured category, which feels very loose, but the notion of child versus adult-directed. And I think that's the balance that we've been trying to strike in terms of you come in very child-directed, very play-based, and then at some point we've got to hit these targets, so to speak, which now becomes much more adult-directed per se. What is that balance? And that's an ongoing question, and it's different for every child, in my opinion. But again, that's something that we've been exploring in terms of when do you make that shift? So you truly pair or build that rapport or whatever other terms you want to apply to it. And then when do we know that the child is ready to take more instruction, to receive it more, to be receptive, so that we can build those skills accordingly? But that's a tough question, and I think we agree. It starts with us sort of taking their lead to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an idea I want to explore, and there's maybe a few offshoots of it, but I think it's an important concept. So from the conference that we had, right, there were some people that were actually kind of more in the academia side of things, Dr. Bailey, maybe even more like yourself. And there were some people that were more in the like direct delivery that owned companies and were coming from some of the companies. And it's always seemed like there's a little bit of a chasm between what goes on in academia and what's actually going on with Johnny down the street when he gets his ABA services.
Yeah.
And maybe it isn't as great as I thought it was. So there were a couple of ideas that I wanted to float to you, and you can kind of pick and choose whichever ones you want to run to. One is we have this idea, this phrase we use, Mike and I, and then at our company, is taking ABA from the lab to the living room. So that's one of it. Sometimes I feel like we try to reenact the lab, and we don't have nearly that level of experimental control in somebody's living room. And sometimes by trying to reenact that lab, we just end up putting a square peg through a round hole. So that one. The second idea being that you talked about that you went from academia to starting your own company. So I don't know if there were any realizations that you had or any challenges or any thoughts there. And then the last one being that it seems like in a lot of so you brought up private equity earlier, some of the bigger companies that we've both come from and that ended up buying our companies out really, I don't want to say didn't care. That's probably too strong, but that's sure how it seemed about what the current research was or what was actually going on. It was just about like billable hours. And I think that's kind of pervasive, honestly, in this ABA field of there are people doing things that everybody, not everybody, but a lot of these companies are citing Lovaas from, the 80s and, we need 40 hours a week because Lovaas said we needed it in the 80s. And what are your billable hours? Like a lot of our clinical meetings, literally none of them at our last company were clinical at all. So there was this chasm between nobody would know what's going on in academia because nothing was talked about what was going on in academia. And I'm sure there's some really good stuff being done and some really good research. But if we could do 15-year-old methodologies but build 3 more hours, the companies would be much more happier doing that than doing anything that's innovative. So those are kind of my 3 thoughts. I want to kind of pass it to you about academia versus the kind of infield and open the floor up to you.
I think this goes into the 5th hour.
Well, that's why I wanted to get to it. I think it's an important concept.
Great question.
So, okay. And you might have to remind me as we go because I heard academia and then got distracted. So academia, but that's like a hot button thing for me. I don't know if you all were on there was a panel. I don't remember if you all were the moderators for that one, but I always say that there is a practice to research gap. It drives me
that's a better way to
crazy
say
to hear people say research to practice gap. And I know you didn't actually say that, but it's just wow. Like, it shows the ivory tower, the pedestal that research gets placed on and academia gets placed on above practitioners, which is wild because this field wouldn't exist without practitioners. So, but at the same time, when we look at an applied science, now I'm not talking about EAB or translational necessarily, but when you're looking at the applied research that needs to be done, how many researchers are actually going and connecting with practitioners to find out what the issues are that we need addressed?
For sure.
And then doing the research accordingly. They're not, but then they're complaining that they don't think practitioners read the research. And it's like, well, why would we if it's not functional and meaningful to what we're doing?
Yep.
Like, that doesn't make any sense,
Yep.
So, and I can't even tell you how many times I've been to conferences and a researcher is presenting on something that's important, and then I'll ask a question from the practitioner lens, and they just scoff at me like, well, who are you to even ask? Like, I'm the researcher. Like, how dare you question what I'm doing? And I'm like, okay. I love Greg Hanley for the work he's done, because he's one of the only people that's really embraced that idea of, like, he had his research-based research. And then when he finally started doing practitioner focused stuff, he realized, I mean, I'm not trying to speak for him, but this is my observation. It seems like he realized oh, I knew nothing as a researcher. But it's not true. He knew a lot, but do you know what I mean?
The Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. When you see the drastic change in the work, he's always done amazing work and he's always done compassionate work, but there's still these huge shifts that happen in the work that he's done once he started doing more with the practitioners than when he was, in more of the silo of just academia.
Okay.
So I would love to see more researchers really connect with, practitioners and look at that it should be going both ways. It should be bi-directional in how that's happening. Yeah. And then of course I would think more practitioners would be pulling in the research if it was more aligned with what would help us do a better job. But then that being said, as I've mentioned, there is research that is in the field for autism specifically right now, and neuroscience, fields related to behavior analysis, that people are completely ignoring because they're going based simply on how they were trained to practice. So there are gaps in both directions. It just drives me crazy when people only talk about research to practice. So I think again, staying informed in whatever population you work with around what's the research that's happening here would be ideal,
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it doesn't, that's I think part of the chasm, right? It doesn't seem like it goes either direction, and you're saying, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Continue.
Yeah. But you just look at the things that researchers are sometimes arguing about too in publications, and it's are there not more important things that we could be doing right now?
Exactly.
What is happening?
Exactly.
Well, and the idea that sometimes it's a lot about how things are learned or how behaviors are changed, and then the idea that there's a protocol that comes out of that can actually be implemented is a whole separate question. I think is something you're speaking to, and we talked about that reciprocal imitation paradigm that came out of research. I think that did a very good job of presenting something that you can actually replicate in your practice. But yeah, I think we can all agree it doesn't go both ways. And yeah, a lot of times the articles you read, it's I'm not sure when I would use this. The language is very elevated, so it's already not very attractive. There's a bunch of stats here that I don't understand. It's pretty hard, but at the same time, we do understand the ivory tower elements of that research. It is very strenuous. It is very difficult to have to maintain grant funding, and there's certain pressures around that. So how to make that a friendlier exchange would be something very interesting to continue to explore, because the research should inform us, and then to your point, Dr. Megan, the research should be informed by what we did with the prior research toward their next research endeavor. So it's a circle, it's a cycle that doesn't exist right now. Or maybe in a very limited fashion. I haven't tapped into anybody yet.
I'll pass it back to you. I know you had more to say on that.
Well, I mean, that's really the big thing for me from the academia side. And I do think, again, I think there's a piece where, because for academia, there's not a requirement necessarily to be practicing in the field directly. And I think this is not unique to behavior analysis. You would see this in med school and different fields in general. Like there's the people who are teaching, and if they're not directly providing the service that they're teaching about, there's going to be a disconnect as things change. And I just I hope to continue to see people be more open to getting that, feedback. I feel like we're seeing it shift, that arrogance and that kind of well, I know best because I'm here at the university is shifting quite a bit. But there's still there is this tendency for people to just dig in on, what they were trained in and not be open and curious to learn more about, why we might shift. Even when I first started presenting on Early Start Denver model, back when it first came out in 2010, I did a presentation on it and I talked about some of the neuroscience pieces that are in that. And one of my mentors was like, we don't need to know about neuroscience. We're behavior analysts. And I'm
really?
He's like, everything was great except for that part. And I'm like, oh my gosh, seriously? We need to know about all of it.
I mean, I might be off my game here, but I'm pretty sure the brain and spinal cord are antecedents to behavior. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm pretty sure if you don't have those, there's no behavior, but that could just be me being blasphemous again.
So what are your thoughts on the lab to living room piece? I think that's where a lot of the maybe excess data and stuff like that comes into play, because obviously in academia or research, right, you have to have a lot of data. You have to have really high levels of internal validity and control and things like that. And, initially ABA was taken kind of from that. So there was, a lot of table and chair and no distractions, and you have to tell the parent to leave, and there can't be anything on the wall because we have to make sure our SD is the only SD. And it was really titrated down to make sure that when we got a data point, we could replicate that, and that replicability. And it seems like the field is going away from it, at least I know we are. I mean, I think maybe the field as a whole is. But what is kind of your thought on that lab to the living room piece?
So, yeah, that's the part I didn't talk about. Your actual question. So,
well, I had many questions in there.
So that part, I think I talk about this quite a bit with people, that there needs to be more done. Again, we are an applied science. And the way, when people are going to grad school, I would say we're probably at the point now where 99% of them are going to be out in the field practicing. They're not going to be in a research lab. But still, a lot of the programs are still structured as if they're going to be conducting research, and people aren't being trained to know the difference, right? Okay, if you're doing a research study, these things are true. And when you're with a human, these things are true. And even when you're doing a research study, you're likely with humans. So we need to be a little bit more flexible there too. But that's a whole separate discussion. So when people are trained, that we have to have this very strict data collection and these very strict procedures and all of the things that from a learning history, reinforcement history standpoint, their professors have been conditioned as the most valuable things. That's going to be problematic when we then go into a home and none of that is actually true. And it could actually be in the opposite direction. The more you try to do something like it's a research study in a person's home or school or community, they're not going to make the progress we would want to see. We need to be able to be flexible and make adjustments and all of that kind of stuff. So I think more needs to be done at the training level, whether it's supervision or university programs, to show that there are two different things going on here.
Sure.
We need to understand how we do research in a way that's ethical and humane. And we need to understand how we can take the science and use it. My favorite example that I give with this is not mine, but I did a presentation with Dr. Merritt Shank, who was a BCBA at USF, and he studied baseball. So his study was with a little league team and working with the pitchers, and we presented at ABAI, and he presented his research. And somebody asked a question, or he had it in his presentation, I can't remember, but basically this idea of our science is incredible. There's so many different things we could do with it. And he had so many ideas of what he wanted to do with this little league team, but he can't make the rules of the game. He can't change the game. So he had to think about, how can I make the best use of the science with the game I'm given, not the game I want to be playing? And I just think that metaphor is huge. People need to be trained to learn and be nimble enough with our science to have it work with the game they're given, whether it's the family, the school, the community. Figure out. If you can't figure that out, then our science might as well not exist.
That's tricky, right?
To just making up a game and trying to play, a whole entire different set of rules.
we spend a lot of time teaching the rules of the game. You could probably be a better umpire than player.
Yeah.
In that sense. It's the same with our RBTs, right? You do this 40-hour classroom training and they pass this competency exam, but at the end of it, they probably have no idea how to run a session. And again, both things are really important. And that's what you're speaking about is how do we make them come together better? Because we're teaching the right things. You need to know all the rules of the game to play baseball. But if you don't play baseball, you're not going to be a very good player.
For sure. Yeah. It's that balance, right? Because if you stray too far from, it has to be individualized, much more so in the home than it does the lab. But if you stray too far from it, then you're losing the scientific validity. So is the science still the science anymore? But if you try to replicate it too much, that's almost impossible in the home. Yeah. So it is a challenge. And that's just, that's that kind of chasm that I saw. But it does seem like there are a lot of people out there trying to bridge that, which is good, like yourself. And I think that third piece is just the motivation of companies to try to do better service and not just be more fiscally, doing better fiscally, because that's the other, but that's a whole nother, that'd be hour 6 of this, this podcast.
I'm going to add one more thing. One of the things I really liked at Florida State was they did both for us. So we would read articles about a topic, right? And they usually had like a foundational article that was, the first thing published on the topic, like one of the first differential reinforcement articles. But then we would read a couple articles that were new and like recently published. And all of our exams were scenario based. So it would be like, you have a client where X, Y, and Z is happening. How would you apply a article and why? And we had to, our answer was looking at how to take the information and make it relevant to the scenario they gave us. And we couldn't just regurgitate like every single step of the study and be like, oh, they did this and that's what I would do. We had to explain what parts of it we would apply and why and how it all comes together. And I think the more, whether it's through supervision or graduate work, that people would incorporate that style of knowledge application, we would see more of that happening where people can understand how much to replicate and how much to adjust that still aligns with the science, but would make sense for the individual situation.
Okay. Speaking of making sense, got to get to the 7 steps of instructional control. So I found out when we were moderating the podcast that you had some input into that article, or you worked with Dr. Schramm. So I love this article. Check it out. You can literally just Google 7 steps for instructional control. I use it in my parent groups. Can you talk to the article, how you got involved with Dr. Schramm? Let me pass it to you for that, because thank you. That's gotten me a lot.
So I'll tell you the quick story. When I was first moving to Virginia from Florida State, I was on a lot of message boards. So back in the day, there were Yahoo groups, and I was on the Yahoo groups. And I had a couple clients when I was at Florida State that were not responding to traditional escape extinction procedures. So I just, used my knowledge of the science and thought about, what was going on for them, and did some analyses to figure out what was maintaining and what skill deficits were there, and came up with a procedure that was basically the 7 steps, but I had never read the 7 steps. So somebody had posted on the Yahoo group asking about they had a child or something where escape extinction wasn't working. And I commented with here's been my experience when that doesn't work. This is what I did. And Robert contacted me and he was like, where'd you come up with that? And I was like, my brain, I don't know. And he was like, why, wrote this thing, the 7 steps, you haven't read it? And I was like, no, I think he published the first book in 2008 and this was 2009. So I hadn't encountered it yet. When the funniest part is right around that same exact time, I was establishing my client base in Virginia, and I had a parent reach out to me that had seen our exchange on the Yahoo group. And she said, I just moved here from Germany. Robert was my BCBA, and I'm hoping to have you be my BCBA because you all seem to do similar things. Oh, wow. So it's like a super small world. So I ended up working with that family. But then once Robert and I got a chance to chat and whatnot, and we met up at one of the ABAI conferences, I went to his workshop and basically stalked him a little bit And I was like, I'm going to pick your brain all night long. He was like, okay. So we decided to start doing some work together. And I created this training packet and integrity checklist. And I did a little mini study in Virginia with a center that was not using the 7 steps. And we showed the effectiveness, of using the 7 steps compared to the current practice, which was basically traditional escape extinction, had amazing results from it. And then we just sort of kept, doing stuff together from there. We're actually in the process of revamping, and we have been for like 2 years because I keep getting sidetracked. We're like this close to being done, but I need a few days in a row of several hours to just knock it out. So as silly as this might sound, I'm leaving for a cruise on Friday, and I've decided to try to make it like a working cruise.
Oh, wow.
So I'm hoping it'll be my little retreat
to
try to get it finished. But so back when the 7 steps first came out, it was so drastically different from what people were doing with traditional escape extinction. And the whole idea was basically to create this, fun oasis of fun and just be super, super, super engaging, which some people were doing that already. But even when I watched Robert with like his initial pairing videos, I realized I have never been trained like this. And he's just I don't know if it's naturally, but from his learning history, he's a super fun, motivating, energetic guy. So I think whether it was the 7 steps or anything else, anyone ever watching his early trainings, you just felt like you learned a ton about just how to be like a fun therapist or a fun behavior analyst.
Which is so important.
Yeah. So that part was huge, and then the whole idea of we're not going to physically force or use like nagging or anything. We're not going to keep repeating ourselves. We're just going to wait until the child's ready to engage again. And the thing that I think is most important with the 7 steps, especially back then, was how we can make ourselves part of the fun. Because a lot of people were being told to pair to become a walking M&M, but they weren't really being guided on how do we make ourselves part of that fun experience.
Isn't that step number 2? Make yourself fun? Mm-hmm. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. So if I had it my way, like I told Robert, I was like, when we redo the 7 steps, I think we should make step 2 step number 1, because it is the most important, but they are what they are.
Sure.
So with the new 7 steps, we have done a lot to revamp it to where we are looking at making it more aligned with being affirming. So one of the things I told Robert, back when he published his book in 2008, but we published a book together with like the training packet and everything. We did that in 2012, I think. So in that time, we've definitely learned and keep doing better and all that kind of stuff. And what I realized is a lot of the like language and the way it's written is more focused on the parent and like essentially kind of making the parent's life easier. So instead we're working on really updating the language to be more affirming and honoring of the child's experience while also supporting like the parent or the therapist. So you guys can have the first preview here because we haven't really put this out anywhere. But so we updated the steps, and I'm just trying to pull up the document where they're listed so I can tell you what they are. We're calling it the 7 steps of instructional motivation now. So the steps now are step 1 is step 1 is still basically the same. Identify and organize your reinforcement. Step 2, that used to be have fun, is now build an authentic relationship. And again, it's focused more on showing your child that you're authentically there and like with them and you're there to support them and have fun. Step 3 is how and when to give important instruction. So we put a much bigger focus in this one on like really closely observing the child and choosing when to place demands based on the child's priorities and values and not just like what the adult wants to see. Step 4 is to use positive reinforcement. That one really hasn't changed. But again, we've put in a little bit more language around you're not just like doing it like I'm trying to withhold reinforcement from you so you'll do what I want you to do. It's more, again, closely observing and determining how best to use the reinforcement to support the child. Step 5 is the same too. It hasn't really changed that much, to grow your expectations over time. Step 6 hasn't changed, determine your priorities. Step 7 is the biggest change. So if you remember, step 7 was basically like to shut down the fun and like use like a minor form of extinction where we're not going to make you do the thing, but we're not really going to sit here and engage with you until you come back. So now instead of that, it's to troubleshoot. Because if you get to a point with step 7 where the child has left you, it's like no longer choosing to participate, then something in the first 6 steps is not going well.
Yep.
So it's more to stop and reflect and think about, okay, where did I lose this? Like, what do I need to be doing differently? And like have it as a reflection moment instead of shutting down the environment and trying to wait for the child to come back to you.
That makes a lot of sense. And that goes more towards, and we use the term blanket extinction. You kind of talked about it with escape extinction, like, historical ABA, right? Shut down the fun. If they're not doing what we want, then we just don't do anything until they do what we want. So it seems like kind of what you're saying is now we're troubleshooting the situation and we're not completely detaching. We're trying to problem solve.
Yeah. So, and it's just so funny because when the 7 steps came out, again, it was just such a drastic change, and people, you obviously know, because you're one of them, were just like blown away. Like, oh my gosh, this makes my practice so much better. But then, I go back and I read stuff now from the book and I'm like, oh, we said that. Why did we say it like that?
Evolve, let me ask you this question. And I really like the changes. I think that's awesome. And I want one of those copies as soon as it gets released. So you got to let me know where.
He needs to re-wallpaper his office. So as soon as you can get that manuscript or a copy of it, he's going to appreciate that because now his office walls are outdated with the old steps. So.
Yes, and I really like taking control out. That again, that seems like more good. Of a affirming thing rather than I'm going to control somebody. The first step, identify and organize reinforcement. Do we run the risk of, and maybe it's just explained within there, of with that phrasing, thinking that reinforcement is more extrinsic because we're talking about organizing it?
Yeah. So this is Robert's language mostly, but it's basically like creating your environment in a way that's organized and beneficial for the child. So this might mean for some children that things are organized like in the original 7 steps where you might have things in containers and, all of that kind of stuff. It might mean that you just know what your boundaries are and what, especially for gearing it towards parents, like knowing what types of things require you to sort of step back and say, like, that's not safe. We need to, have a shift here. And then knowing what types of things it's like, we're going to be flexible and that kind of stuff. So it's more focused on that side of thing as opposed to like extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So it's more setting like that organizational view of what are kind of our house rules and what are the types of things that we need to provide some more support and that kind of stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. I wonder if the word reinforcement, because it's used in a later step, would be better not used in that step if we're talking to parents. So we can use a word that's more comfortable, and then as we explain things, then we introduce it in positive reinforcement. That's my unsolicited 2 cents. I love your article. I am
Robert,
not trying to change
light advice yet, over here. And again, once you do, he needs several copies to be able to redo his office.
But thank you so much for doing that article. That has really been a lifesaver. I've seen, and it says, I think there's a preface in there before the steps that talks about making it parent friendly. And it really is. Like anybody who's listening to this podcast who isn't affiliated with Mike or I in any way, please check out this article. It really does connect the dots in a way that if you do those 7 steps, you will see an increase in what used to be called instructional control. Now, what do you call it?
The 7 steps to instructional motivation. And I have to give credit to Vince LaMarca. He's actually the one that was like, wouldn't this be a better way to call it? And we're like, yes, it would actually. Thank you for that.
I think the word control is, I understand it academically. I think it is problematic in translation. And that the way you just put that is much better. So the idea is we're not controlling anything. We're influencing motivation, and the more motivated the child is to do what we're asking them to do, then the better our data or whatever it is we're after. So that makes a lot of sense. time flies.
You got to
when
get
you're
to
having
the do
fun.
better.
Yep.
Yeah, so we need to. Let's fast forward to the modern day. Let's talk about Do Better Collective. I know you've got some events and some things that you're working on currently. Let's take this time to make sure we let people know about those. So first things first, Do Better Collective. You've sort of alluded to it and everything we can do better throughout this almost 2 hours. Tell us what you guys are doing currently. Tell us a little bit about the history. Tell us whatever you want to tell us about Do Better.
Okay. So quick. So basically, when I first started doing trainings, when I was presenting to tell people about Early Start Denver model and 7 steps, I had this like opening slide where I listed out the various things I learned in my early career. And then I had a column that said like how I learned to do it better, basically. Like this is the way I did better. And that sort of was just like an underlying theme for me. That training was from like 2009 or something, 2010, like a long time ago. And then I kept finding myself going, whether I was supervising people, I did a lot of international supervision. I did a lot of, United States supervision too, teaching college classes, whatever it was that I was doing. I kept encountering situations where people weren't learning all of the things I had the privilege of learning in my career, whether it was at FSU or other avenues. And I just kept saying, like, we can do better. We can do better. Like, why is it not better? So I went to a training with Rick Kubina in 2017, like the end of the year. And he was doing his precision teaching, very inspirational, like the stuff he was talking about. And so many people in there were just blown away. And I just kept like, man, why are we not here? So that like night or something, I went home and I just wrote out all of the different things that I felt like I was constantly having to teach people that we could do better in our field, that are integral parts of our field that exist and research has been there, but people just were not learning about it. So for 2018, I started what we call the Do Better movement. And I had like a different webinar each month and it was free. And just to try to get like this information out there to people. It was on things like behavioral skills training, functional communication training, some of the advancements in early intervention, like all sorts of stuff that I felt like I just learned, but other people were not learning. And then we just kept with that theme. So in 2021, we're actually about to celebrate our 5th birthday, November of 2020. We started the membership community. So we'll have our 5th birthday on November 15th. And we're going to be doing some like special offerings for that. But so we've carried over this. We do a webinar every month trying to bring in practitioners that are doing, better things in our field and have them share the work that they're doing. And then we have the online community where people can interact with each other, access the previous, like we have 5 years, we'll have 5 years essentially plus of webinars because we started the 2018 webinars going forward, as long as they're still relevant, are in there. So we have a ton of, 70 plus different courses, and we have meetings twice a month where we share resources and we put all the resources and recordings from those meetings in there as well. And it's nice because the community is made up of seasoned behavior analysts, RBTs, parents, new behavior analysts. So everyone can kind of come together and interact with one another. And like they're different. Everyone's open, curious, humble, like interacting just to, elevate whatever they're doing in the field. So one of the things we started last year, because I was getting so frustrated with conferences, is called Rejected. And the point of Rejected is to really platform and highlight the work of practitioners in a full conference. So it's online. We might do an in-person one every few years, but right now it's online. So our Rejected 2025 conference is happening in December. And the whole idea is there's no rejection happening. Like people, it's basically first come, first serve. And as long as it meets the, values of our practice and everything, they can present. And
if you need an MC or there's anything we can do for that, let us know. But go ahead.
I'll let you know. Yeah. So we have a really cool mix of practitioners this time around. Last year we did I planned it in 2 weeks and we had 30 presentations and it was a lot. So this year we're only doing, I think it's 12, 14, 16, something less than the 30 that we did last year. Okay. But it's a value, we do initially have a values-based registration. We try to keep everything really cost effective. All the presenters get paid for presenting as well because we want to make sure we're compensating them for their time. And yeah, so that's happening in December. And then we also started doing retreats I did the first retreat in it was supposed to be 2020, but it got pushed to 2021. But we call it Couch to Camp, and it's where we do some learning online, and then we all meet together at a retreat in person. And our next retreat is in February, and it's much smaller now because I'm using a retreat space here in Florida where we can only have like about 15 people. So it's a really nice, like, intimate experience. And we do a self-care day that's focused on just rejuvenating and relaxing and getting reset. There's a pool and like musical instruments and like a walking path, horses, goats. Like, it's just this really nice reset. And then on the Sunday, we do the learning. Like, we have CE activities that we do, but they're more workshop-y, and like, we don't use PowerPoints. It's more discussion and workshop based. So those are the two big things we're doing. Oh, sorry. We have one more. 3.
Perfect.
RBTs. RBTs matter. So we're finally doing a 40-hour RBT training, and that's going to come out in 2026. And my colleague, Allison, is an instructional designer. So she's using all of this really cool software to design it in ways that are more engaging and interactive. And we have a guy named Jack, and a lot of it is like the story of Jack becoming an RBT and learning the different concepts through Jack instead of just lecture based. And then we're creating an RBT library as well that's more interactive. It'll have exercises where you're engaging with the content again and not just listening to a lecture. And that for now is part of our business membership. So anyone who has a business membership gets free access to those resources, and it's free for the RBTs. So they pay for their BCBAs, but they get free access for their RBTs.
That is so, as somebody who was the RBT trainer, well, even before as an RBT, for probably the last 15 years and 10 years initially in the big company, like, that is so needed. So thank you, because they often get forgotten. So thank you for doing that. That is absolutely amazing.
Shout out to Allison.
Yeah.
Who was on our podcast.
Oh, it's a different Allison, probably. This is Allison Kim.
Oh, okay.
So you probably don't know her, but you can shout out Allison,
we can
too.
we can shout out Allison. You said instructional design. It was too much of a coincidence.
2 thoughts as to what you said. One, have you, Dr. Scott, what's his last name?
O'Donnell.
Dr. Scott O'Donnell. Are you familiar with Dr. Scott O'Donnell?
We're connected on LinkedIn,
Okay.
but I haven't like interacted with him as much as I would like to. I see his posts and I'm always like, yeah.
He's pretty active.
He may be a good person for the rejected. He's looking at even creating a secondary board for the with the BACB, or in competition wouldn't be competition, for lack of a better term, with the BACB. Might be somebody that would be an interesting person to talk to. Also, you mentioned that you have people like practitioners in the field come and give discussions and things like that from people in the field. If there's anything we can do, so I kind of alluded to this earlier, but shortly after the conference that we moderated, Mike and I, honestly, mainly with inspiration of people like Maggie and yourself, created our own company. So we've been doing our own thing for about a year, doing a lot of, I think, very innovative stuff. We have fought insurance companies on some things, and one, doing a lot of assent-based, compassionate-based care and therapy, and really focusing on quality over quantity. So if there's anything we can do or speak to a webinar, anything for the Do Better Collective, we'd love to do it, because you are a huge inspiration for us going out and doing our own thing. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Where do people find, besides in the show notes, but other than that, where would people find the Do Better Collective?
We have our website, dobettercollective.com. We have Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'll just Do Better Collective if you look it up. I don't really do a whole lot with TikTok. I've been trying, but I'm not young enough to figure it out.
You don't have a Do Better dance or anything? Come on, Megan. You got to learn that on the cruise.
I was at a conference this weekend, and I do like a partnership with this company, Step Forward ABA, and they had a bunch of their younger staff there that are still RBTs or just newly certified BCBAs, and they were, making all these TikTok videos, and I shared my idea because I don't know if you all have seen the trend, but it's like, you seem happier now. And then the person's like, thanks, I left an abusive relationship and took care of myself, or something like that. That's the trend. And I was like, you guys should do one where it's like, you seem happier now. And then the person's like, yeah, I left a crappy ABA company and now I'm with Step Forward. And all other little young people looked at me like I was crazy. They're like,
we might
what
steal
are you
that.
talking about?
We'll take that, and we'll credit you. It's okay.
So I'm like, all right, I
man.
clearly need to like contract a 22-year-old to do some stuff with us.
We've been trying with the podcast. I'm with you. I'm just not interested in the social media part, but it's so relevant. It makes a difference, and it certainly lets us get a little further reach. So we agree. We're going to have to steal your idea, just blatantly.
Go for it.
We joked about we could probably go 3-4 hours. We are at the end of our time. Thank you so much for gracing us with all the information. And this has been a very, very fun conversation. I get the feeling we'll have you back at some point soon.
Love to have you back.
I like to do a little 3 to 4 point synopsis here at the end so we can do our tagline. So the first one I'm going to say, Dan, is consider motivation over control.
Oh, I like that. Oh, maybe research. What was it? Research.
The practice to research.
Practice to research. Not just research to practice.
Definitely do better and
always analyze responsibly.
Cheers, Dr. Megan.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Always analyze responsibly.
ABA on Tap is recorded live and unfiltered. We're done for today. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See you next time.